Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thank you for joining me for the podcast where personal stories can have a global impact. September is National Preparedness Month, and it's a good time to welcome back our guest, Julie Roberts. Julie, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Melvin. I really appreciate it. I look forward to our discussion today.
Yes, me too. So the last time you were here, we talked about your former role in the Trump administration's weather disaster management. Unfortunately, we're here now because of the weather disaster that happened at Camp Mystic in Kerr County, Texas, over the July 4th week. So you're the founder and CEO of PSEMA. Can you explain what that is and why it's so important right
I can. So PSEMA, is the Private Sector Emergency Management Association. And that is an organization. It was founded about 4 years ago to bring together business, industry, government, nonprofit partners to work together before a disaster and then come together after one happens and try to find ways to help a community. And then earlier this summer, we actually created the PSEMA Foundation, which is another arm for us. So the association is a members association, and the foundation is a 501c3, which gives us a little bit of a different opportunity to support communities like Kerr County and other camps around the country.
now? Okay. So how big is the alert gap that you're trying to close? And what risks do camps face today because of gaps in their early warning systems?
So as you mentioned, I previously was with NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration, under the Trump administration. I was Director of Communications, Deputy Chief of Staff, and I worked really closely with the National Weather Service and the Hurricane Center during my time there. I have worked with the National Weather Service for many years. So I grew up here in Texas, and I happened to be on vacation when the July 4th floods happened in Kerrville. And, I woke up that morning, and the first thing I thought was how catastrophic it was. But I'll be honest, we didn't know it at that moment, right? It was still kind of developing. But I also was curious of how the National Weather Service handled it. And so I went out and looked, and they had actually predicted in some state reports 24, 48 hours before there was going to be significant rain. No one could have predicted the amount of rain into rivers. And those riverbeds were so dry that it was essentially concrete, right? You had all that water. And so when you have a 30-foot wall of water coming down, it's going to be devastating no matter what. And so I was looking, and as the event started to unfold and more information came out, what became very clear very quickly was that there was no cell service, kind of that area, just lack of cell service, plus power went out. And then you had camps that were built along the river. And the one thing, and then we found out later that no one issued out an alert through a manual system like a code red or some of those other systems that people can sign up for. And so one of the things that did go out at 1:40 in the morning was that National Weather Service alert that was a flash flood emergency. That is somewhat of a newer phrase for that. And when you hear that term, flash flood emergency, that means it is a catastrophic event unfolding. And so National Weather Service issued their alert at 1:40 in the morning, but most people were asleep, maybe not, thought it was a little bit of rain and didn't understand what was coming down that river. And so one of the things, days later, I wanted to find a way, how do we help other camps? And how do we, reduce the likelihood of the loss that we saw with Camp Mystic? And so I started thinking about it, and I thought, well, if camps had a NOAA weather radio, not only the radio itself, but the actual information about how to understand the alerts and how to understand the preparedness side of it, then maybe future events that would have woken up somebody in the leadership team. I'm not saying it needs to be in every cabin. It just needs to be in one person's cabin. But it could have woken them up at 1:40 in the morning and potentially helped them evacuate before the water came, a couple hours later. And so the goal under the PSEMA Foundation is we've partnered with the American Camp Association, Midland Radio, who is one of the big producers of NOAA Weather Radio, and along with the American Logistics Aid Network. And our goal is to provide 12,000 camps, and that's not just overnight, that is all types of camps. So it could be youth camps, summer camps, religious camps, whatever type. But there's 20,000 camps across the country. We want to try to provide 12,000 of those camps with a NOAA weather radio. And that can help things from a tornado that comes up, another flash flood, a severe lightning storm that maybe is moving in and the kids are outside and they can tell the kids to come in. And so our goal is to raise $600,000 that will allow us to provide those 12,000 different camps with those NOAA weather radios. Not only that, but we'll be providing them also with the preparedness campaign and also opportunities for webinars and engagement with the National Weather Service and with other partners to understand what does it mean when you get these alerts and what action to take in the immediate.
Okay, your plan is called Signal and Shield. How did you come up with that as the name of
Well, I thought about it, and so providing that signal, providing that warning, and so this is what we're referring to as the Signal and Shield Camp Initiative, right? This is our first focus, but with the idea that we take that and expand Signal and Shield into other preparedness campaigns for kids across the country. In discussions right now of taking over a kids campaign, a previous project that I worked on that I'm hoping that we're going to be able to get the books and be able to then start working on other types of hazards for kids. But it's really about providing that signal, providing that information in a real time manner, and then providing that shield, and not a literal shield, but that shield of protection and how to help not just camps, but children prepare. Also, what I found when I was with Florida Emergency Management is two things happen with kids. One, they come home and drive mom and dad, right? How many of you recycle because your child came home and said, "Hey, we're recycling now"? But two, they grow up to be more prepared adults. So we've accomplished the preparedness messaging when they're little and they're more open to that. And then when they become adults, they're already there. And so that's really the Signal and Shield, providing that information and then trying to help provide that shield that can protect children and families going forward. Radios. So it's one of the things is we have a partnership with the American Camp Association. So they have 3,000 partners and another couple thousand that are affiliates. But then we also have other associations that they have outreach to. And so from a logistics standpoint, our partner, the American Logistics Aid Network, is going to work with one of our warehouse partners through Allen and also one of our logistic partners. And so then Midland Radio will, once we've raised the money, we'll have those radios shipped to a central location. And then that partner through Allen will help us send them out to the camps. Along with the information packet, then we'll also be able to start hosting throughout the year these webinars and information sessions for them. Our goal is, a lot of the camps operate, 365 days or weekends or vacations, right? They're not all summer camps. And so our goal is to start partnering now and getting those pushed out. And then as we move closer to the summer camps, making sure that we have them into those camps that are those overnight camps across the country, where this will be really important. I was doing a little bit of research and found, 5, 6 different incidents since 2023 where camps were directly impacted by weather that happened, and some resulting in loss of life. Not long after the flood, there was an archery group of Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts out in an archery field in New Jersey, and they got struck by lightning. Now, there had to have been some alerts that went out, but whether or not they were getting them on their phone. I also just want to note, everyone says, oh, we all have a alert. Why do we need a NOAA weather radio? You've got one on your phone. Well, at night, you turn your phones off so their alerts don't go off. But if you have no cell service and no power, you have no way. I say this is basically a brick, right? And so a NOAA weather radio can operate off a battery or even some of them solar powered. And also, if you've got it on, it automatically sends that alert. It's not relying on someone outside the National Weather Service. And so after doing a lot of research and understanding these alert systems, I really feel the NOAA Weather Radio is a really good option for these camps to have that can operate with no power overnight whenever they need it. And, I'd also like to note, I would love, obviously camps are our first priority on this campaign, but also RV parks, because it wasn't just the 27 girls that were lost at Camp Mystic. You also had over 100 other people that were killed. And a lot of them were staying in RV parks or there for the holiday, the long weekend. And so also, how do we help RV owners understand having a NOAA weather radio is a good option when that dynamic is happening, no power, no cell service, or an RV park owner, if it's a July 4th holiday and they've got it, they could have at least knocked on doors and maybe told people ahead of time. And so it really is that broader, how do we help communities and individuals all understand this is an option that would be a good option, especially for overnight. And it's portable. You can program it. And then if you are in an RV and you're going to this national park and then this one, you program it for the area and you're still going to get those alerts. And again, we talked about it before, like National Weather Service has been under a lot of scrutiny and they've faced a lot of cuts over the last 6 months. And I was talking to somebody and the person who would have done some of this coordination took the early retirement and he felt really guilty. And I said, well, he can't feel guilty because that wasn't his choice, but I just have to commend the National Weather Service. Are very good at what they do. I trust them. I know they're going to push that information out. They're going to be there 24/7 to make sure it's conveyed. And so how do we get it out from there is the key part. So when we start distributing them out, one, we'll make sure it has a document that says these are the key alerts to be aware of. Again, the flash flood emergency, different than a flash flood warning. And then also offering them webinars and being able to say, okay, let's do these 50 camps or 100 camps or whatever it looks like. Get on and we'll walk you through how to set up the program, the radio in your area. It's pretty simple. There's a lot of instructions, but we want to ensure that they understand what the alerts mean, how to set it up, if there's any questions. And then they always have a resource back to our association and foundation that we're happy to jump on and have another call with them, or maybe we need to provide them something else that we haven't thought about, or maybe there's a hazard that isn't one of our normal hazards we've talked about. If it's in Alaska, maybe there's an ice hazard that we haven't thought about. And so thinking through, like, what do those need? Because the last thing I want to do is send somebody a radio, not provide them the resources, and it just sits there and we see another Camp Mystic type situation. And that's what, as we tried to think a way to honor those that were lost during that, this was one of the ways that I thought, well, maybe if we can help prevent this in other areas. So I've worked with Midland Radio for years, going back to my days in Florida. They're one of the number one producers of the NOAA Weather Radio. They've been out there for, I think it's their 50th anniversary this year. So they've done this a long time. So it made sense to reach out to them first and say, hey, can we work with you? And is there a discounted rate of a normal radio? Because camps could go buy the radio off of, Amazon or someplace. So I reached out to them. And then as I tried to figure out, how do I find these camps, right? I just went on and I literally put it into Google and said, hey, where's the camp association? And I sent a blind email to the American Camp Association to 6 leaders. And 24 hours later, I had an email back from them. And we started this process probably about 10 days after the devastation, July 4th, but it's taken time to get everything pulled together. I wanted to make sure we did this the right way and putting the right resources behind it. And then Alan, our other partner, that's somebody I've known, Kathy, the executive director, for 15 years. I work with them through PASEMA, actually the first person I told when I founded the association. And because they're the logistics, transportation, and warehouse partner, it made sense. They wanted to step up and help, right? So we can get those radios delivered to them, and then they can help us get them distributed out through the mail or however we decide to do it. So it really, those 3 partners made sense to partner with from a logistics standpoint, honestly. Well, ultimately, Melvin, I would love to do 20,000, but everyone told me I was crazy when I said, let's go do 20,000. So I kind of took a middle of the number. The American Camp Association has roughly 5,000 that are either their members or their affiliates. So there's your 5,000. And so we'll start with that. And then from there, looking at other partners that maybe have other camps that are outdoors. And so working through those associations. Some of them, I had somebody with one of the states reach out and said, hey, what if XYZ state is interested? So from the, after we get through that 6,000 that are through ACA, then also looking at areas that have that higher risk. Maybe there's an area that has a lot of tornadoes that come through there, or a lot of flash flooding. And so how do we provide that? And so we're still working through kind of that other 7,000. Like I said, I just kind of had to put a number on it. But ultimately, I would love to find some partners and sponsors to work with us to do all 20,000. Let's just canvas this country with that radio and being able to provide that safety net. One of the things I was looking, Los Angeles wildfires from January. So the camps weren't in, service when it happened, and they didn't necessarily weren't impacted. But one of the things when I was talking to ACA was they were saying is those kids that lost their homes or were, caught up in those fires, opening a camp as quick as you can provides them a place to go, that mental health, that having that community. And so, and then I was looking in a lot of the areas that the camps use, the natural resources were destroyed in the fires. And so again, the weather radio, if the kids happen to be there and there was a fire that broke out, that would be a benefit, or maybe it's the staff even if the kids aren't there. But it's also just helping these camps become more resilient so they can reopen sooner to get those kids back into a safe place when something has happened. I had somebody ask me one time when I was doing a preparedness campaign in Florida, and they're like, what's your ROI? I said, my ROI is that when there's a hurricane that hits the state of Florida, If more people have prepared and have a kit and are less reliant on the government, we've succeeded. And in this situation, I think the ROI would be difficult to measure other than knowing that if there were to be another flash flood in Texas or North Carolina or one of these states that has a lot of the overnight camps, if that camp leadership receives that alert and is able to take action, then it only takes one for me to say that this campaign will be successful. And we may not be able to measure it. I mean, maybe the story isn't on the front page of the paper because guess what? They took the action and they were able to evacuate the kids, and we're not going to hear about them. And so while I'd like to be able to say, hey, I'm going to be able to show you this is our success, I think it's going to be those stories that come out after that Camp X was able to hear there was a tornado coming at them, and so they sheltered where they hadn't had an alert before. And so I think that's really how we're going to measure the success, is that 5-10 years from now, we're not seeing the loss of life like we saw at Camp Mystic. Yeah, it really could. It's interesting because there's a lot of camps in like North Carolina. So with Helene and that flooding, the difference was that it was in September, so there weren't kids at the camps. But what if that flooding happened in the middle of July? It could have been the same type of a situation. So again, yeah, I think it's those not hearing those stories or having somebody in the camp leadership team pick up a phone or reach out and say, hey, guess what? We evacuated. And so that was our. So the radios have a couple options. One, they're usually plugged in, but they have a battery backup. So plug it in. If the power goes out, you still have a battery backup. Some of them, I'm not certain if the one we're looking at purchasing right now, but some of them do have also a solar backup. So if you had to evacuate, emergency managers have asked people to have a NOAA weather radio or something like it in their hurricane kits for the last 25 years. It's just now we're trying to expand that to other places and thinking about it in another way. Then as far as like once it's programmed, if you live in an area, those programs, it's going to stay. If you were to say it was an RV and you were traveling, you can reprogram it. It's pretty simple to reprogram. And so really the limitations on it are really slim, right? It's like, it really is one of the best systems out there to receive those alerts any time of the day. False alarms, I mean, you're not going to hear false alarms. Now, some people turn them off because maybe they're getting a flash flood warning or watch and they really just need the emergency. And sometimes, yeah, maybe people will get frustrated with that. But I would just say to everyone, like, continue to have them, right? Like, because you're going to want that alert at 3 a.m. when there is something happening and your phone's not receiving those. Well, it's National Preparedness Month, which is a key message for everyone. Remember, you have your preparedness kit, whether you live in a tornado area, or hurricane, or earthquake. Think through your hazards. One time I was actually over in Italy and I walked past and there was an EOC, Emergency Operations Center, and I inquired why. And they said, well, you're on a live volcano. And I'm like, okay, well, let me figure out my hazards here, right? Like my volcano's not in my planning list. Lived in Florida and Texas. But I just encourage everyone to think through, where do you live and what are your hazards? And then being able to have that plan and thinking through how to communicate should all the communication go down. All disasters start local. That's one thing. And then it obviously, if it can't be managed at a local level, then the state comes in or the federal government. But we encourage everyone to think through their preparedness plans with your family, with your business. So PASEMA focuses on business resilience and business planning. We have business continuity plans. We want to help businesses get ready beforehand, right? So you can come back sooner when a disaster happens. And so working through and with the emergency management community from an overall preparedness is what the more prepared and resilient we are as a nation, then the less we're going to rely on government when something does happen. No. And I haven't thought about that. So great, Melvin. Now you made me think of something. No, just kidding. So, no, we haven't thought there's no regulatory requirement from us for doing this, right? I mean, this is an established NOAA Weather Radio is an established system that NOAA has promoted for 50 plus years. I will say here in Texas, in the last couple of weeks, the governor just signed into law the new camp safety legislation that is requiring camps across the state to think through their preparedness planning and having an alternate source to receive weather alerts. So we think this campaign actually dovetails really nicely into that mission of what this new legislation is promoting. And so how can we support those camps? Do we need to help them figure out their preparedness campaign? Do we need to think out, or their preparedness messaging? Do we need to look at different hazards? Do they have an emergency plan for this hazard in their area? Is that something we can help them with as well? Because again, that building those resilient camps, one, will also reassure mom and dad when they drop their child off that, hey, they've thought through this. They know what they're doing. They have a plan for this. And so then also just hoping to avoid what we saw earlier this year. I mean, that's going to have to, tie into what the camp's plans are under this new safety legislation. I'm sure that's part of that communication tool, right? One of the heartbreaking things was to hear the stories of the parents that did not get the phone call that morning that said their child was safe or they had, lost them or couldn't. Unfortunately, I mean, it's really sad that there's still one child that's still missing, and it breaks my heart 2 months later. They haven't been able to find her. And so, it's that part of it's going to have to be, how does the camp handle their communication tools? But what the goal of our campaign would be to say, this, Camp X has taken this program and they're utilizing this. And so they've got the resources, the training, and then almost the assumption that they're going to take that action to make sure those children are safe, whether they've taken them to another location or moved them to higher ground, or have been able to call mom and dad and tell them what's going on. It really is just providing all the tools that we can that can help those camp leaders and decision makers make the best decision at 1 o'clock in the morning. Because people, or they want to criticize and they forget that it was 1 o'clock in the morning along that river. You've been there. It's dark. There's no power and it's pouring down rain. And it's hard to understand that somewhere up, lots of trees. And no one could have predicted that two rivers were going to combine at the same, that one place and have that much water come down like it did. And so, again, just being able to provide the information to help them make a decision. I mean, I will say that I think it's like 85% of the money we're trying to raise goes towards providing the radios. We've done very little. It's like 15% overhead amongst all of us. We're a nonprofit. Well, all three of us actually are nonprofits. Midland is, providing us a discount for the radio itself, but the three other organizations are all nonprofits. And so really the only other cost is a little bit of the funding to help put together the materials that need to go out. And then, a little bit of our staff time, my staff time, to help make sure we're coordinate the webinars and that type of thing. But 85-90% of that money that's being donated is going to provide radios, which is the key part, right? That's what we want, either the radio itself or the information that needs to go along that we have to produce at the same time. Yeah, I would love to see this like take off in camps, and RV parks start to pick up the messaging and do something on their own, right? Or we can coordinate that with them, or boys and girls clubs. Maybe there's a boys and girls club in a community where a camp is also located that needs a NOAA Weather Radio. But and outside of the camp initiative with the radios is also the broader preparedness. So I kind of talked about I'm hoping to announce in the next month or so a kids campaign that we're going to take over all of the creative for, that already has books that are established for things like, when thunder roars, go indoors, that type, the thundering message, or what are tornadoes and how to not be scared, how to evacuate. And so there's a whole series of books that have been written for kids that focus on the different types of hazards that are out there. I actually did a project with the state of Alaska that was a flood book. And so one of our rabbit was our first character, goes to Alaska and meets his cousin, the snowshoe hare. And they talk about flooding, and it's in a way to talk about, moose gets caught in a flood. And it was probably one of the best projects that I got to work on. And so we're in discussions right now of taking that campaign over with the hopes that we grow our Signal and Shield into that broader kids campaign and being able to help kids understand. The goal too is to not scare children about weather. You have to educate them of what it means, but you can't make them so scared that they're not willing to go outside, or they see a tornado. My poor niece, she's 16 now, but she would freak out when she was a child if there was bad weather coming. And so it's, how do you help them understand what it means and how to, prepare for it and respond to it without being fearful. And so that's our broader goal under the foundation, is really build out an entire kids preparedness campaign that we can help make, schools across the country understand what this looks like, and providing the resources across the country. Bigger risk. When I was with Florida, we had a character, his name was Professor Tinkermeister, and we had a human version of him. And we would go around and do outreach events at kids events. And we had NOAA Weather Radios, and Tinkermeister was there, and this gentleman walked up, and this was probably 8 years ago, and I still remember this conversation. And his little girl's name was Gabby, so she's an adult now. And he was telling us that Gabby was terrified of tornadoes, and she refused to go upstairs to her bedroom if there was severe weather anywhere. So Professor Tinkermeister took her aside, because he loves to study weather, right? That was his thing. And so he took her aside, and they talked about tornadoes and severe weather, and he explained it. And then he gave her a radio and said, look, if you put this in your house, you'll hear an alert if something's going on. And so Gabby went off that day, and I got an email from her dad later, a couple of weeks later, who said, like, she was no longer scared. She understood it better, and she was excited to have her NOAA weather radio so she could understand what was going on. And, when you ask me about ROI, well, that, I don't know whatever happened to Gabby. I don't know if she's still worried about weather, but that little girl went home and felt better about what she was listening, having to deal with. And she would sleep upstairs when there was weather, the other part her dad said. And so that's really the ROI, is to understand that if you make a difference in one child's life when they become an adult, they're able to talk about it, but also they're no longer living in that fear. And it really does take, all of us to help them understand severe weather and what it looks like, and how to prepare for it as well. So you can go to, so it's PSEMA.org. So PSEMA.org/foundation. So that is our foundation page. And from there, they'll find information on how to support the foundation, and also how to support the Signal and Shield campaign. So we're asking for a couple things. One, you can donate as an individual. But what I'd ask is that if you are here in Texas in particular, or someplace around the world, and you have a company that this is something that you would like to partner with us on, we're looking for corporate partners, because if we can get a few of those, that'll help us really kick this off, and to be able to raise that money to start with that 3,000, and then eventually work up to the 12, and then we'd love to see the 20,000. And so being able to help us raise that money and support it, then we can start pushing these radios out. And if you are willing, and you have a company, and maybe you're based out of a certain city, wherever, Kansas, wherever it may be, if you want to work with us and help us say, okay, let's do Kansas, let's make sure we take in, your corporate state, we'll do that as well. But, we all live in hazards, whether it's a tornado, like we just talked about, or hurricane states, knock on wood, it's been quiet, we're halfway through hurricane season, or a flash flood, or as we saw with LA, the wildfires that happened in January. There are hazards all around us. And so it's all an effort to build out more prepared communities as we move forward. We are getting a lot of traction as far as people talking about it. The fundraising has been slow as of, now, but my hope is that we find the right partner that can help us start really promoting that out, and generating. I think that once we find one big corporate partner, maybe we'll have other ones come in. But no matter what, we're going to continue to push forward. My goal, like I said, is this campaign will run until, next May, right? Because we want to provide those radios to camps now that are in operation, but then also making sure we've got the funding to provide the radios to the camps that will have summer camps overnight next year. Because I do think, that's when parents will know, okay, they've got this tool. I'm good with sending my child off to an overnight camp for 2 weeks, that if something happens, they're going to receive these alerts. And so, we just launched it like late August. And so we're starting to see some traction on it, but always looking for new partners. Preparedness starts at home, whether it's your family or your business. It also, then think about your other family members, and then your community. But preparedness, as we talk about National Preparedness Month and is this campaign, preparedness needs to be on all of us. So I ask everyone to stop and think about, how do you prepare if a tornado comes through tomorrow? Do you have a plan? Do you know how to contact somebody? If you're separated from your child because they're at school and you're at home, have you thought about that? And so my one message is that it takes all of us to build more resilient communities, and all of us to have a plan to do that. And thinking through those that maybe haven't thought through it, and encouraging them and helping them complete that as well. Thank you for the invitation, and thanks for the opportunity to talk about this really important campaign today.